Hello, everybody. Hello. Hope you're well, and I hope you've managed to find me. I gather that there were two separate streams scheduled, but there's only actually one now. So I hope that's not confused everybody too much, and I'm sorry about that. Welcome to June. Here we are, and I hope you had a good week last week when I wasn't streaming. Probably much better use of your time. But anyway, here we are again. And I first of all wanted to talk about the events of yesterday, or last night to be precise. I don't know whether any of you were involved in the wonderful performance of the Messiah that was done by the Isolation Choir and performed pretty much in its entirety on their YouTube channel last night. I have to say, I was so impressed. I thought the technical aspect was extraordinary. I just couldn't believe that it was possible to do all of that so apparently effortlessly. I'm sure it wasn't effortless, but that's how it came across. And I'm sure many of you were taking part, and many of you were also, no doubt, watching if you weren't taking part. So I just wanted to share my own views about it, without in any way being critical, because as I said, it was extraordinary and amazing that it was possible to put all that together, and to have people coming together from all over the world, literally, to perform together in as far as they could was just amazing. However, as always, the technology, again, does have its problems, doesn't it? It does have its downside. I thought it worked brilliantly well for the soloists who just sang beautifully. And Ashley Riches, for me, was the star, but I've always liked Ashley, as you know. But and the orchestra were, obviously, they were playing one instrument to a part, which made it easier in some ways, although the balance was a bit odd and you heard an awful lot of first violin and not much else. But I mean, that's just a sort of technical thing that obviously happened somehow in the editing. But overall, for the soloists and for the orchestral players, it seemed to me to work really well. The downside, as I see it, is the whole concept of having choirs coming together. I was told, and I wait to be corrected, but I was told that there were 800 people had submitted their voice parts to the performance, which is astonishing and amazing and great to have 800 people taking part, singing the Messiah. But when you were listening to it, it certainly to me didn't sound like 800 people. It sounded more like a few dozen, really. Whether that was just because of the problems of editing and the problems that you get from trying to put it all together in such vast numbers, or what it is, I don't know. But that seemed to me to be not as grand and as spectacular as I was expecting. I also was very aware, as I'm sure you were, that of course, again, ensemble is an issue, which I'll come back to in a moment. And there were some slightly comical moments when Ben England, the conductor, who was obviously doing an amazing job, but somehow in the editing had become 2 bars ahead of what we were actually hearing. So he was bringing everybody in very, very competently and very efficiently, with great charm and great accuracy, but 2 bars ahead of where we actually were. And that obviously wasn't his fault. It was just something that happened in the course of putting it all together, but it made me chuckle a bit. And then the other thing that really I found both fascinating, very entertaining, but also slightly annoying, was reading all the comments from all these people. There was one lady called Sue Sarah, I think her name was. Sue Sarah, not Sarah Sue, but Sue Sarah, who just was making these most inane comments throughout, hundreds of them. And we looked her up on her YouTube channel and afterwards, and had great delight in hearing her sing herself, which was great. But anyway, that's by the by. But the problem, coming back to the problems of ensemble, is the fact that, to me, music making is all about singing together, making music together, working together, where we can actually hear, feel the presence of those musicians around us. And I know, you know, it's stating the obvious, but it just underlines, doesn't it, how difficult it is to reproduce that sensation, that feeling of working together with fellow human beings in the same room, working, hearing, adjusting, blending, and all of those things that we're so used to doing and used to working at. And if you're having to put in basically your own solo voice, as opposed to working with lots of other people at the same time, it's just a fundamentally different concept, and one that I don't think is ever going to replace what we're used to doing, no matter how good the technology gets. It seemed to me a bit like, if I use a cricketing analogy, our wonderful fast bowler Jimmy Anderson, the greatest swing bowler the country's ever produced. It'll be like Jimmy Anderson being told, "I'm sorry, you can't play cricket anymore. You can't delight in the skill and intricacy and subtlety of the art of swing bowling. But what you can do instead is you can play French cricket on the beach or something." Perfectly good activity, perfectly good fun to do, but just not the same, and can never be anywhere near the same. Anyway, that's what I felt. But hats off to those involved, because it was a phenomenal event. And I just was so impressed by the sheer numbers of people taking part and the enthusiasm that they brought to it, which is great. One thing it did do was to make it very clear, abundantly clear to me, that we have to try as hard as we can to get back to some kind of singing together in some form or other as soon as possible. And whilst, you know, everybody thinks, oh, it's going to be impossible to do that in the current climate, I have to say I played for a wedding in not a wedding, if only. It was a funeral in Reading this afternoon. The delightful, oh dear, it seems to have cut out. Something's gone wrong, clearly. Oh dear, not sure what's happened here. Annabelle, it cut out on me. Yeah, why? Is that to tell me that they couldn't hear me or something? Oh, apparently I'm still live, so I will carry on. I just can't see any pictures and I can't see myself, but that's actually quite an improvement. So I will carry on. What I was saying was, this afternoon I spent some time playing for this delightful old lady, 96-year-old, for her funeral, and her son was the vicar. And there were, I think, 16 people in the chapel, all spaced apart. But we sang two hymns with enormous gusto and great energy and enthusiasm. Everybody was singing. I was singing. The undertaker was singing. The chapel personnel, whatever they're called, she was singing along as well. And it was great just to be in that one room with all these people a long way apart from each other, but singing really, really well. So I'm just wondering whether when the time is right and when we are allowed to do such things, whether we can work something out by way of being able to distance everybody in the Turner Sims sufficiently well so that we are feeling safe. And maybe we can have maybe a split rehearsal, so we only have half the people for the first half and then the other lot come in for the second half, whatever. But finding some way of doing it, I just think is so important, because we desperately, desperately need to get back to making music together in the same room, which is what we need. Anyway, moving swiftly on from that, but I just wanted to make some comments, because I thought it was such an important event, and it's obviously something which a lot of people have been building up to for a long time. For today, I wanted to talk about a composer that maybe strikes you as being slightly unusual when it comes to choral music, and certainly one that we don't normally associate with choral repertoire, and understandably so. The composer I want to talk about today is Claude Debussy, and in particular his wonderful cantata, La Demoiselle Élue. Now, the thing about Debussy is we associate him largely with orchestral music, with his opera, with songs, with wonderfully evocative piano music and all the rest of it. But as I say, we don't normally associate him with choral music. And strictly speaking, La Demoiselle Élue is not really a conventional choral piece. It's a piece for a solo soprano, a solo mezzo, large orchestra, and a female chorus in 4 parts. So there are 2 altos, 2 soprano parts. So it's very much 4-part writing, but scored for just female voices. And that's probably one of the reasons why it doesn't get performed very often. However, one of the things that I find fascinating about Debussy is that everybody thinks of him as an impressionist composer, whatever that means, and that's probably not a discussion for now. But what we forget about Debussy is his connection and his adoration of the music of Wagner. And one can certainly see and hear not only a lot of Wagner's influence in this cantata, La Demoiselle Élue, but also a lot of the same techniques, harmonies, and so on. And the thing about Wagner, of course, Wagner is glorious, wonderful, but it takes a long time. You probably need to sit for 3.5 hours for one of the big music dramas. La Demoiselle Élue has a lot of the same power and passion and subtlety and romanticism and glorious harmonic writing, but it only lasts 20 minutes. So it's like a little mini Franco version of Wagner. It's slightly more subtle than Wagner would be. The orchestration is much more delicate than Wagner's, and it really does ring of French culture as opposed to Germanic culture. But having said that, Debussy was literally obsessed with the music of Wagner. He even boasted that he could play the whole of Tristan on the piano from memory. Whether that was true or not, I've no idea. But who knows? But I'm sure, I have no doubt that he could certainly play quite a lot of it. So rather than calling this an impressionist piece, the cantata is a setting of the Dante Rossetti poem of the same name, The Blessed Damoiselle, which of course was written in English and it was then translated into French. And Debussy knew the French translation, and it's the French translation, obviously, that he's set to music. It was written or completed in 1889, which was 2 years after he first started going to Bayreuth to listen intently to Wagner's music. And one of the things about this piece is, of course, being a Rossetti poem, Rossetti, the poet and painter who was so vital for the creation of the pre-Raphaelite movement, it strikes me that this piece, rather than being impressionist, is much more linked to the pre-Raphaelite movement and to a kind of French version of Wagnerianism rather than being impressionist. And of course, it is a comparatively early work as well. He entered it for the Prix de Rome, the big competition for composition that was so important for development of new composers in the late 19th and early 20th centuries. The poem itself is a rather sad poem, and it's a story about a blessed damoiselle, a young girl who is in heaven. Obviously, she has passed away at some point, but left her lover on earth. And basically, she is wistfully waiting in heaven, waiting to be reunited with the man of her dreams, who is, as it were, stuck on earth. And she has all kinds of thoughts and some great revelations about him joining her and them celebrating together. But right at the end of the piece, discovers that, of course, it's just a dream and he's not going to join her anytime soon. So in some ways, it's a very sad tale, very sad piece, but it's just so beautifully written and well worth listening to if you've got 20 minutes of your time. Just want to pinpoint one or two things. First of all, it's scored for a large orchestra, triple woodwind, 3 trumpets, 3 trombones, 4 horns, 2 harps, no surprise there in French music, and the strings, obviously. But it's very, very subtly used. So it's not a loud piece. A lot of it's really quite quiet, apart from some very rhapsodic moments. Most of it is very quiet and very subtle and just beautifully orchestrated chords, melodic lines, wonderful gossamer textures. It's just a glorious piece from beginning to end. Obviously, you have the soprano soloist who plays the damoiselle herself. There's a mezzo soloist, mezzo soprano, who acts as the narrator in conjunction with the female chorus. So those are the essential elements of this piece. And one of the things that obviously Debussy got from Wagner was the use of leitmotif. And just in case you're not clear about that, a leitmotif is simply a melodic, usually a melodic phrase that's connected with a particular character in an opera or a particular idea or a theme or an emotion, whatever it happens to be. And each time that character reappears or that subject reappears, emotional subject, be what it may, then the leitmotif will come back into the music. It's a way of constructing a piece which is very different from how music was traditionally structured with first and second subjects and variations and all that sort of thing. This is about associating a melodic idea, a musical phrase, with a particular character or a particular idea. And one of the most famous examples of this is the famous Tristan chord, the love theme, if you like, from Wagner's opera Tristan and Isolde, and it's very well known. It's a whole series of quite rich, slightly dissonant harmony, which gradually resolve, but they tend to resolve onto another dissonance before you then finally reach the last dissonance. So if I play that again. So even that last chord, which sounds perfectly normal, is a major triad, but still has a seventh left in it. So it is a resolution, but it's not quite a resolution. But that's one of the famous leitmotifs that Wagner uses. And sure enough, Debussy in La Demoiselle Élue uses similar ideas, including that Tristan chord. If I just play the opening, this is from the opening orchestral passage, and this is known as the circling charm, because it's a kind of circular harmonic phrase of chords which resolve and come back and are repeated. So very simple idea, just gentle chords, but slightly ambiguous in terms of their tonality. Although there is no key signature, no sharps or flats, but it sounds much more like E minor rather than C major. So the first chord progresses to, there's C major, D minor, E minor, and again D minor, C major, D minor. And the circular nature of this harmonic progression is clear cut, both in the 2-bar phrase itself and the individual bars themselves. Both have this circular idea. A few bars later on, get the same idea, but this time centered around C minor. And the next motive, which is another leitmotif he introduces, is known as the hope motive. This is where the hope that the two characters are going to be united eventually. And this is interesting because this is played just by the strings. It's in a triple time signature, 6/4 in this case, but it's dominated by hemiolas. And you all remember what a hemiola is. Instead of going 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, we go 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. So although it is a compound time signature, this is played as like a chorale theme, played by the strings. So there we've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, but then the hemiolas start. Wonderful richness. resolving just at the last moment. And then the next theme we hear is played on the solo flute, and this is Damoiselle's theme itself. Very much C major, quite simplistic. This marks the end of the orchestral introduction, and this is the point where the female chorus come in. And they're joined by the mezzo soprano, the reciter, and she starts with a whole tone scale. So her first phrase wonderful use of the whole tone scale, which is such an enigmatic part of Debussy's output. Then I'm going to move on to where the Damoiselle herself comes in, and once she's in, she only enters about halfway through the piece, and then she dominates the rest of the cantata. But she's introduced by a very melancholy solo oboe, playing this phrase. And this really is one of the most evocative moments of the piece. And when you think of this phrase, single notes, but it forms a very distinctive chord. If I put all the notes together, which is a diminished triad, or it's a diminished triad with an added seventh. If you're used to hearing minor seventh chords, where you have a minor triad and a minor seventh, and then if you flatten the fifth, we get that. So in this case, E, G, B flat, and D. And the Damoiselle's first phrase just mirrors that. And that leads into the circling charm idea. That leads into the Tristan chord. When she mentions her lover being on earth, that's where Debussy uses the Tristan chord. Resolving. And then right at the end of this beautiful, beautiful piece, when she realizes that it's all been a dream, a fantasy in her mind, and it's not going to happen, he's not going to join her anytime soon, we then have another version of the Damoiselle theme itself, the flute solo that we had at the beginning, but this time it's combined with the Tristan chord. Final time that you hear that Tristan chord, coincides with her weeping at the very end. And the cor anglais takes up the weeping idea. And the strings finish off with a reference to that circling charm. Again, a chorale idea. And we cadence in C major with the chorus singing R. Altogether, one of the most glorious pieces I know, and well worth a listen to, worth any 20 minutes that you have available. There's some good versions, including one that has on YouTube, one has the poem, both in French and English translation, coinciding with the sound. You can't see the players or the singers, but it's a beautiful recording by Claudia Abbado in the LSO, I think it is. So well worth it. And I hope that's been of some interest to you. And many thanks for putting up with the technical issues. I hope you've managed to hear me. And I look forward to speaking to you again next week. All the very best. Bye for now.